Hello, my friend, and welcome to Peaceful Prosperity. I'm your host, Oliver Manalesa. Good to be with you today. This is the second video in a series that I'm doing called Before I Called Myself a Coach. But today I want to discuss identity death and what it's actually like to walk away from a life that was working. And as you heard in my last video, I had invested my entire sense of self in this identity as a real estate investor. And this was an 8+ year investment of time, energy, and money. And this was literally the narrative, the story that I was living inside of. And not only that, my environments that I was in was all reflecting that back at me. So I was friends with people who were on the same journey, who are moving in that same direction. And so when it came to finally actually letting that go, that closing down my business, that wasn't just a business decision. It was an identity death. Letting go of those 8 years of my life, I remember moments where I felt like just a complete failure. You know, there's people who cared about me, like my parents, who were concerned about taking on this entrepreneurial path. And so it felt like I proved them right, that it was such a huge risk and it was so unstable. And I felt like, wow. Not only did I close down my company and lose my identity, I proved my parents right that maybe I shouldn't have done this. Maybe I should have just, got my degree and got a job. And also because I was so young, I was so impressed with myself. And so I was just like, oh, I was that guy. I was that asshole who was so annoying in conversations. I was like evangelizing this financial path, this career path. And I'm sure it was frustrating for some people to always be hearing about it, but that's just how excited I was. So letting go of it, I felt like I was just kicking myself. I felt like, oh man, like how I wish I could take some of those moments back. All these things that I had said. And not only that, I feel like the hardest part was being all in on something and actually letting it go and having a complete blank slate. Sometimes we think it's such a great idea. Let's start from scratch. Let's start from a blank slate. But man, it is so intimidating. My wife is an artist, and I can only imagine a blank canvas and just staring at it and it staring back at you, how confronting it is. It's like, okay, what am I gonna put onto this canvas? And for me as a writer, blank page, oh man, that's the inadequacy, the self-worth, all of that, the doubt, the judgments, all of that starts to come up. So one of the things that can just paralyze people, which it felt like it did for me for a little bit, was just having all the options where I could choose anything. I could start another real estate related business. I could use my real estate license that I had in my back pocket just for that business. I can go get a job in sales. I had a background in recruiting and staffing. I can go back into that. Like there's so many potential things that I could have done. And even beyond that, I could go back to school and finish my degree. And it's so overwhelming. It's like when you go to like a Chinese restaurant and the menu is like this thick and there's 100 different things that you could order. Sometimes if you don't know what you want, that's overwhelming. And so it did feel very intimidating for me to know that I could choose whatever I did next. And not like as well, not only that, right? Having to explain myself and my decision and what led to that decision of closing down my business and letting go of this identity to, like I said, so many of my relationships, my networks, my entire adult life up until that point, from the point I was 18 years old, was all tied to real estate. So the people that I hung out with, the circles that I were around, they all reinforced. It's like, oh, you were just burnt out, or you could have just changed this or changed that, or you should talk to, my mentor or my coach, or try this strategy, or, like just get into be a real estate agent. Like it just, they were all supportive and trying to be there for me, but it all contrasted what I was actually going through, because me stepping away from that path, it went against what they were doing. They were becoming all in on it too. It created all kinds of different awkward scenarios, awkward moments. And all the people who I had, declared these bold promises to, of like, how many properties and by what age and when I'm going to become financially free and all these things. It's one thing to try to hold yourself accountable and say out loud what you are going to do as a way of having skin in the game. But man, when I changed direction, changed paths, it was very difficult to own up. It was very difficult to say, like, this is what I've decided, and I've decided to let it go, and to kind of go through that whole story. And just to give you a perspective, like, I let go of real estate fully, 13 years ago or so. And even to this day, I have people coming up to me and asking me if I'm going to go back into real estate. Like literally, that's how attached this identity is. And it's very difficult to shake. It's definitely one of those things that as soon as you have embedded your image with this title, with this profession, and whatever it may be, in your case, it could be something else. It could be as an engineer. It could be as, a masseuse. It could be whatever, it could be a teacher, whatever it is. It'll be with you. It'll stick around for a very long time. And so there's a lot of, friendships and relationships who, one of the things that I share with my clients is the people around us, they see us as who we were, not as who we are becoming. And it's very difficult to stray away from that, to go against that, because our survival mechanism, our human nature just wants to keep reinforcing and keep bringing you back to being in character, so to speak. And so there's some expectations on the version of me that maybe I felt like, it's like, well, I didn't want to impersonate that person. So there's aspects of kind of letting people down. Like, I think for some people, especially at that time, I may have been a source of energy, a source of inspiration, a source of affirmation for their own paths that they were taking in real estate. And I'm sure it was awkward. Maybe it even threatened to some extent their reality, or, didn't. Of course, you don't want to have to question your own path, especially when you're already kind of woven into it and starting to gain some momentum. Having to have these conversations were difficult, but honestly, the most difficult conversation was the one that I was having with myself. Maybe they're right. Maybe I jumped the gun too soon. Maybe I let go of the business too soon. Maybe there were some changes that I could have made. And there's a term, and it is sunk cost fallacy. And that is when you have invested so much into a project, into a business, into a career path, that even though you've put so much into it, the expectation is, well, I'm going to get back the return on investment from that particular source. And so rather than let it go and maybe realize your gains from another direction, from another project, from another vehicle, it's like, well, no, that's the thing that I've lost so much. I've put so much in. I'm going to get it back from that particular source. And that's sunk cost fallacy. So I had these whispers of doubt, but I'm very, very fortunate and blessed to say that a part of me just could not ignore the truth. That finally, when I let that part of me, the authentic part of me, finally breathe, it was unignorable. So any of these whispers of, you should just get back into it, it was already working, just tweak it a little bit or do something else in real estate. I mean, it was something. It played a factor, but it wasn't a big enough factor to stop me in my tracks. The truth just has such a profound way of generating so much force and so much energy. And for me, it had already started something. It already stirred something in me that it would be very difficult to stop that. And I think that's kind of where we all need to have a little bit of a reflection moment, because I think we can get distracted from what other people are doing, seeing what they're doing online and seemingly doing well at, and thinking that maybe we need to replicate something that they're doing or they haven't figured out. And that can, the noise of that can be so loud that it muffles out the voice inside. But what I have found, especially with myself and in my coaching practice with my private clients and with my group clients and with the apprentices in my coaching apprenticeship, it's realizing that when you tap into the whispers inside of you, like everything else starts to fall away. It's not that they disappear, but in terms of the impact that they have on you, the extra drag that they have on your energy, it starts to diminish. It starts to go away. And sometimes, and I think one thing I want you to take away from this is realizing that when you do make a difficult choice that is for your own good and where God is calling you to be, that as hard as that is, people not understanding why you would leave something that was starting to do well and starting to work, trying to explain that to people is very arduous. It's very frustrating and it's very repetitive, to have to explain and go through the whole thing over and over and over again. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you've done a level of self-discovery work yourself. And what's really beautiful is when you crystallize within you who you are, who you're becoming, what you want, where you're headed, the direction of your life. But your external reality hasn't even caught up yet. Your spouse maybe hasn't even caught up yet. Your parents, your family members, your friends, your colleagues, these people haven't caught up yet. And so now you have this sacred, crystallized truth inside of you, and you're trying to affirm it and trying to get validation about it or trying to justify it, and a part of that is no fun. A part of that, I think, it's almost like be careful who you share your dreams with, because some people aren't going to be as supportive as you would want them to be. And sometimes their own doubt about what's possible can really rob you of some of that excitement. And that is something that we got to really be mindful of, that sometimes we got to keep it close in our chest. And maybe maybe that's part of what we do need to be more mindful of is to be a little bit more private to a certain respect until it is at that level of resonance and strength that even if somebody questioned or tried to poke holes at it, that of course you want to be open to criticism and feedback, and you don't want to just live in your own bubble. But honestly, there are only a handful of people in your life whose opinion really matters, and everybody else is outside of that. So I think letting go of an identity and letting it die, it put me in this in between, where you're straddling two different worlds, who you were and who you're becoming, but who you're becoming is still not fully solidified. So you're in the middle, and it can be very fragile. It can be very delicate to be torn between these two places. And so one of the things that really held me together was my yoga practice, that I would go to yoga every single day, and it would bring me presence. It would ground me. It would help me release stuck energy from my body. It would serve as an escape. And that would bring me joy. And there were these times where I was actually journaling and meditating and playing with different ideas and trying to connect different dots about my story, about my past, about what's brought me to life. What have people reflected back at me about what my gifts are, what my unique value is in this world. And some of that was starting to bring me some excitement. So it was starting to light me up as well. And so it was like these two opposing realities of who I was and who I'm becoming, and trying to see, trying to allow it to really land for me. Because if I look back, the signs were there, but it's like, if your soul is a mirror, the mirror can get really smudged up. It can get really foggy with your old dreams and old stories and other people's judgments and fear of what people think. And so you might have the signs, you might have these things reflected back at you, but until some of that stuff is cleared up, some of that stuff is wiped away, it'll be difficult to finally own it. And of course, I think having a grieving period is so important as well, because it's like, to just jump straight into what's next might completely delay a much needed process of healing. I needed to, these aspects of who I was and who I was becoming and what I thought I was building, there was a romance around it. There was a beauty, there was an excitement around it. And a part of me felt like I had to mourn some of that I had to really sit with what I was letting go of. Because I didn't know if I would be able to have that level of excitement, that level of passion again. I didn't know that I would, if I could have a love for something that I did again. And so giving that space to grieve, giving myself that space to grieve that, I think was incredibly important. It was acknowledging and getting a sense of completion of like, okay, here are all the things that I had decided and dedicated myself to and created, and here are all the ripple effects and consequences of that. Here's what it led to. Here are the fruits. Here are the benefits. Here are the pains. Here are the struggles. And just really taking in that whole picture of like what got me to where I was at that time. But it was actually very, very important for me to realize that, okay, well, the energy that was being spent there, I let it go because I could be investing it in something else, that could be more impactful, a higher good for my gifts, ways that I could, that only I could potentially help people. And so this is so interesting, because even before I even started calling myself a coach, I actually was coaching. And in this middle ground that I was in, this transitional period, and I was trying to connect some of these dots about my past. There was a friend of mine that I mentored in the rent to own business, who, by using my learning lessons of, I think I was 2 years in the business, full-time, self-employed, he was able to produce results within 4 weeks. Within a year, he let go of his job in a bank and became full-time self-employed entrepreneur. And I looked at some of these other conversations, coffees and walks that I had with people who would be moved to tears in conversation with me, or sparked to make an important decision for themselves. Like, there was this one person who said, man, you told me if I wanted to become an entrepreneur, I got to learn sales. And the next day I looked up Toronto sales jobs on Google, applied for a job, interviewed for it, got the job, and started to do well in that business. And then I ended up starting my own business in that path. And I was like, wow, something that I said, something that I saw could really be that impactful. And as I was starting to finally put these pieces back together, and like I said, I was sharing with people what my process was and these changes that I was making, that, they were drastic, especially because I was so concrete. It seemed like I was so firm that this is who I'm becoming. This is where I'm headed. So to make a drastic change, there were certain people who leaned in, and they were actually mirroring back at me what I was going through, where something was working for them, where they had invested in a path for themselves and they needed to make a change, where their soul wasn't nourished. And so this is, leaving something old to step into something new, grieving who you used to be, and realizing that you're not that person anymore. I started to see that is such a universal theme. It's a universal process that a lot of people go through. And before I called myself a coach, I didn't even realize it. I was attracting these conversations and these souls who were just like me. It helped me strengthen the conviction that I had of this, I made the right decision, because there were people around me who really hung on to some of the things that I was saying about what I had been learning and what led me to these decisions. And they felt seen, and they felt like I understood them. And I started to realize, like, okay, something that I'm going through and have gone through is actually of value. It could be of good use to people around me. So, my friend, if you feel like you're torn between worlds, if you feel like you're straddling who you were and who you're becoming, and you're stuck in this in-between place, and it's uncomfortable and it's challenging, look, you're not broken. You're just in this threshold. Transformation is happening. And it's so normal, it's so human to have doubt, because you are in a place of not knowing what you're going to do and what you're going to do next and who you're becoming. The old life can seduce you back because there's such a security and stability around it, and the new path is so unproven. So it's so normal to doubt yourself. But if you're grieving an old identity that you've let die or is dying, it's not a sign that you're lost. It's actually a sign that truth is finally getting some room to breathe. Who you're becoming is finally starting to emerge. You could actually start to see yourself so much more clearly. For me, the identity death, it wasn't the end, it was the doorway into real coaching. Way before I even owned that path or owned that title. So, my friend, I thank you for sticking with me and listening to this part of my story. So many parts of it I haven't shared before. In the next video, I look forward to talking more about, that the fact that I had been coaching for years and that this was actually an important indicator for me of what I was going to do next. And I think it's so funny how some of these seeds are planted so long ago, and we've been invited. We've been invited into our gifts and what's so good about our souls and what we can, the type of change that we could affect in this world. Those seeds are planted so long ago. And when we start to awaken to that, it can be so beautiful. It can be confronting, but it can be so beautiful. So I thank you for being with me today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Be well. God bless.